What's next for the Russia-Ukraine conflict? Threats of nuclear weapons are now on the rise. On Sunday, November 17th, the Biden administration approved Ukraine to use the U.S.-made Army tactical missile system, ATACMS, to strike targets within Russia. This prompted the Kremlin to respond by updating its nuclear weapons doctrine, stating that an attack on a non-nuclear state like Ukraine, which is backed by nuclear power, will be treated as a joint assault on Russia. We will talk about this escalation and foreign policy, broadly speaking, in the next administration with our next guest, Ray McGovern, founder of the Veteran Intelligence Professionals for Sanity and a former CIA officer. Ray chaired the National Intelligence Estimates during the Reagan administration and prepared the president's daily security briefings. In 1990, he was awarded the Intelligence Commendation Medal. Good to see you. Thank you for joining.
Thank you, David. Glad to be with you.
I want to play for you just this clip of Putin responding to the recent authorization of long-range missiles to be used on Russia. Take a listen, and we'll respond together.
In the updated version of the document, aggression against Russia by any non-nuclear state, but with the support of a nuclear state, is proposed to be considered as their joint attack on Russia. Russia will also consider the possibility of using nuclear weapons when receiving reliable information about a massive launch of means of aerospace attack and their crossing of our state border. This includes strategic and tactical aircraft, as well as cruise missiles and drones, hypersonic and other delivery vehicles. Russia reserves the right to use nuclear weapons in case of aggression, including if the enemy, using conventional weapons, poses a critical threat.
I'll just get you to respond to that. Putin has been talking about the use of nuclear weapons for quite some time. Is this particular announcement of any significance?
It is, David, but it goes back 2 months. His first announcement of this new policy came on September 12th in a supposedly informal interview where he stated this case, saying that once ATACMS, or these longer-range missiles, were authorized for use by the United States, since they could not be used without the United States technology and guidance, they would be considered an attack by the United States and NATO on Russia, and it would be a state of war. Now, he said that on the 12th of September. On the 13th, actually later in the day on the 12th of September, the Pentagon came out with a statement saying, we don't think it's a good idea to authorize these weapons. The next day, the 13th of September, Keir Starmer, Prime Minister of Britain, was in Washington, and his voyage there to Washington was to secure approval to do precisely that, these longer-range strikes into Russia. The President Biden, came in and was very, very angry because he had just been told by our military, no deal, this is really stupid, don't authorize them. And he had to tell Starmer, look, put away that little portfolio which has the targets in them, we're not going to authorize these missiles. Big disappointment for Starmer, big disappointment for the neocons like Blinken, who had tried to force this decision on Biden. Okay, 2 months ago, the 12th of September and the 13th, actually happened to be Friday the 13th, bad news for Blinken and the neocons. What happened now? Well, 2 months later, we have word from David Sanger. Who's David Sanger? Oh, he's the official spokesperson for the security agencies with the New York Times. And he says, well, President Biden has approved the use of ATACMS and other longer-range missiles to strike deeper into Russia. Where is Biden? Oh, he's in Brazil or Peru. Has the Pentagon been informed about this? Just yesterday, the Pentagon spokeswoman was asked, well, did you know about this? Was Secretary Austin informed about this? And she said, I have nothing to say about that. I can't address that. We just have to go with the reports over the weekend. So what do we have here? We have the essence of a coup. We have Blinken and Sullivan authorizing these strikes in the president's name without even informing the Pentagon. And of course, Ukraine waited just 2 days to shoot or fire 6 ATACMS into an area near the border between Kursk in Russia and Ukraine. 5 of those were shot down. One did some damage. It's disputed as to how much damage. We'll probably know from the bombing damage assessment later today. But they've been used. The big question, David, of course, is will Putin allow himself to be provoked just 2 months before a new administration into doing the kinds of things that Blinken and Sullivan want him to do? My own professional opinion, having watched Soviet leaders and Russian leaders for 5 decades, is no. He's winning. He's winning in Ukraine. He's got these little pinpricks, which is all the ATACMS and the other missiles can make. They're not going to change the trajectory of the war. Even David Sanger and his colleagues in the New York Times admit that. So why are they doing this? Last thing, they're doing this, David, because they want to go out into the Western sunset right after the administration is over, saying, look, we gave the Ukrainians everything they asked for, including these long-range missiles, and it's not our fault that now they're falling apart. It's inevitable. They are falling apart. The march toward the Dnieper River by the Russian forces is inexorable. It just depends on how quickly Putin wants to do that. I think he's going to attrit until the new administration comes in. And then I think really he's able to deal from a position of strength, and Trump would be able to make a deal. That's my view on this.
Okay, I do want to come back to the Pentagon's reaction because they did hold a briefing on this matter just yesterday, I believe. But I want to bring your attention to this particular article from the Washington Post. So apparently Biden approved Ukraine's use of long-range U.S. weapons because or in response to North Korea's deployment of thousands of troops to aid Moscow's war effort. So as you are aware, Ray, North Korean troops are now on the Russian and Ukrainian border. Now, does this make sense? Does this rationale make sense to you, first and foremost?
Oh, first and foremost, we're not sure about the North Korean troops. I assume it's true since everybody's saying it's true. There's no real photographic or other evidence that they're there, but let's assume it's true. Doesn't make any sense at all. Number one, the Russians don't need them in Kursk. They have all those Ukrainian.
Well, hold on. How would you verify this? How would you verify the presence of North Korean troops if you were to, conduct surveillance on this and actually, check for yourself?
You would have satellite photography. You would also have intercepted messages. They would be communicated in Korean. It would be really, really easy to substantiate this. But, it's really not important. Your real question was, this makes sense?
Yes.
The Russians don't need them there. They only makes sense if the Russians are trying to make a point. And that point is that we Russians are not without allies. We have a mutual defense treaty with the North Koreans. The defense treaty says if either is invaded by another country, the other is obligated to move quickly to its defense. So we have been invaded in Kursk by Ukrainian forces, and so this is a natural result of that. And we're going to do the same thing with Belarus. So we have mutual defense treaties that are actually actionable, unlike the NATO treaties, which are dubious in terms of whether the United States is willing to sacrifice Chicago for Paris or Berlin.
Well, how do you think China is responding to this development? Let's assume, for the sake of argument, that North Korean troops are indeed on the ground. How does this change the relationship between China and the West?
Really good question. The Chinese have said nothing particular about this, far from confirming the presence of North Korean troops. The relationship between Russia and North Korea has grown closer and closer. In the old days, one would have said, well, the Chinese might resent this, they might fear this, but the new days are here. The Chinese and the Russians are joined at the hip. I'm sure that the Chinese were advised about what the Russia is doing with North Korea, particularly the new mutual defense treaty, just really finalized and signed a couple of months ago. And, people don't know this. David, you probably will be interested in this. Russia has been so close to North Korea that they have given North Korea their next to the most sophisticated intercontinental ballistic missile. Russians call it the Topol M. The Koreans call it Xiang 24, I believe. Okay. Now, what is that? That's an ICBM that has all of the bells and whistles on it, decoys and all manner. Its range encompasses the whole United States, including Mar-a-Lago. Okay. And what's the big thing? It's mobile. You can't figure out where it is so easily from satellite photography. They gave that to North Korea more than 2 years ago. Now, because a friend of mine, Ted Postal, a physicist, raised this in a very reputable publication, Jake Sullivan was asked about this more than a year ago. And he said, well, yeah, we know, we're watching that. We'll get back. Our intelligence people are looking at that. We'll get back to you. Well, he never got back. And of course, the domesticated press people never asked him. So this is an element that is really surprising to me, that the Russians would give the North Koreans one of their, well, not their most sophisticated, but they're next to the most sophisticated intercontinental ballistic missile. My God, I hope they put a little trigger in there so that it can't be fired without Russian approval. But that is impossible to know.
Yes. Okay. So we'll discuss broader foreign policy objectives of the U.S. In just a bit. But going back to Russia and Ukraine, so what do you think is Putin's next move? You mentioned that we do have only 2 months left before Trump enters office. It's unlikely, you said, that Putin will want to do anything really out of the ordinary before January. So what do you think he's going to do?
Well, he has already announced with a rhetorical flourish the new nuclear policy, which, as you indicated, indicates that not only, if a client state like Ukraine is supported by a nuclear armed state like the United States, it will be interpreted as an attack by both, and the nuclear armed state will be part of this calculus. Outside of that, it looks to me, and I've put myself in Russian leaders' shoes for 5 decades now. How does Putin look at this? He's winning in Ukraine, okay? He's got a new administration coming in 2 months. He's got the upper hand. Is he going to allow himself to be provoked by pinpricks? Why do I say pinpricks? Because they've moved most of their air and other military material out of range of these ATACMS. The range is only 190 miles. And look at the border. Look how far Moscow is away from that. Okay. The other thing is there are a limited number of ATACMS. Nobody knows how many Ukraine has, but they don't have very many. Okay. And the other thing is that it's just not really sensible for the Ukrainians to think that they can get away with this thing without being enveloped in Kursk. And Kursk is the next big battle because, the Russians talk about cauldrons, right? They have the Ukrainian forces, the ones that are left in Kursk being part of Russia proper. They have them in a cauldron. They're about to finish them off. Best estimates indicate that about 13,000 or more Ukrainians have already perished. And these were the Ukrainian reserve. These were the crackerjack Ukrainian troops, which the Ukrainians, for some strange reason, took off the battle line in Donbass and put into this feckless venture into Kursk region of Russia. Why? For political reasons, to show the United States that, we could still absorb and really use your arms aid. Please keep it coming. We've now even invaded Russia. A terrible mistake.
Okay, let's now take a look at the Pentagon's press conference from yesterday.
Sorry, just on the North Korean troops, roughly how many there are now on the ground around Kursk? And are there indications that North Korea is ready to actually send more troops?
So in the Kursk region, what we approximate is approximately or over 11,000 DPRK troops in the Kursk region. in terms of are more going to be sent, it's certainly a possibility, but that's our initial assessment right now along Kursk. Carla.
Hey, thanks. To follow up, Ukraine fired long-range fires into Russia. Did they violate the policy, or did the U.S. policy change?
Yeah, so Carla, what I'm going to tell you is exactly what I told Dan, is I just don't have anything to announce today, and I don't have anything to confirm at this time.
The policy, did they tell us about it? I mean, did they or did they not violate the policy, or did the policy shift? Officials have told VOA that the policy has changed.
Yep. So, Carla, appreciate the question, but again, I just don't have anything to announce or to confirm at this time.
You're the expert, not me. How do you respond to that?
Well, the notion that she would not confirm that the Pentagon was told about this beforehand, which she says then and later in the interview, is preposterous. Now, as I mentioned before, the Pentagon nixed a plan very identical to this back on the 12th of September. And on the 13th, the president gave in and said, all right, Pentagon, I guess you're right. And he told Blinken, go shove it, okay? In nice words, perhaps. Now, what's changed? Well, the president is out of it. How much he's out of it? Well, he was certainly out of town, right? He was in South America. And it looks like, very much like, from this interview here by the press spokesperson for the Pentagon, that the military was not involved in this decision. Now, it was weird to begin with. We all learned about it from David Sanger, who has a record of being spokesperson for the security agencies, including the CIA. He was the one that said 7 times in September of 2002 that Iraq had weapons of mass destruction. That is flat fact. So his record is very clear. He tells the New York Times, or he reports in the New York Times what the security services tell him. So that's what he said. He said, this was authorized by the president. Now, there's no presidential statement. The Pentagon now admits that it wasn't really informed. This means a kind of a mini coup, or a mini coup attempt by Blinken and Sullivan, which has incredibly risky consequences, because even though I don't think Putin will rise to the bait here, others think he will. Others think he might even strike out at NATO bases in Poland or Romania, and therefore give NATO the pretext to enter the war en masse. I don't think that's going to happen, but it's possible. And what you're talking about here is existential. And you and I might not be around very much longer if this escalates into a nuclear war.
Well, how, in theory, would it escalate into a nuclear war?
Well, let's say they are unable to prevent ATACMS from reaching deeper into Ukraine than they have been before. Let's say the Russians can't identify and destroy these ATACMS in Ukraine before they're shot. Let's say that some hotheads in the Kremlin, who seem to be pretty much reined in by Putin at this time, but let's say that they say, look, Mr. Putin, you have rearranged our nuclear policy to allow you to use a small nuclear weapon in these circumstances. Why don't you do it? We dare you to do it. Well, under those circumstances, Putin might be tempted to do that. But as I said before, he's in control. He's winning in Ukraine. The ATACMS cannot reach Moscow or anywhere near it. And the other thing I should mention is that I had thought that as soon as this new decision was made, that the British and the French and maybe even the Germans say, yeah, right on, we're going to send ours too. They didn't. Okay. So this just really that the president was not really involved, that Blinken and Sullivan tried to tell the British and the French and the Germans, oh, this is real, but they don't buy it. They're from Missouri, so to speak. They need to be shown.
Well, on the note of Blinken, here is one of his recent press conference statements. Take a listen to this 30-second clip. It's quite remarkable.
Working to make sure that Ukraine has what it needs to effectively defend itself. The United States continues to step up. We've obligated just recently and pushed out the door another $8 billion in security assistance for Ukraine. That was in September. another almost $500 million just a few weeks ago. And President Biden is committed to making sure that every dollar we have at our disposal will be pushed out the door between now and January 20th.
Okay, we know that Trump has a different take on foreign policy when it comes to Ukraine. Why is the current administration doing this?
My guess, and it's an educated guess, I would hope you understand, is that Blinken and Sullivan and Biden want to go out into retirement, so to speak, being able to say, look, we gave the Ukrainians everything they ever asked for, including Zelensky's repeated pleas for permission for these longer range strikes into Russia. We honored all that, and we even, the problem is not with us. We gave them everything. Even Sullivan 2 days ago, you know what he says to the press? He says, it's not the infusion of materiel and money. We did that, and what happened? Nothing happened. What's the problem? Ukrainians don't have enough troops. They don't have enough troops. They need to get more troops. They have to younger and older troops. So Sullivan's already blaming the Ukrainians for this. When Trump comes in, it will be impossible not to recognize that the Russians have won. Okay? Now, whom are the Democrats going to blame for this? Trump, because there's going to have to be a deal where the Russians will be seen to have prevailed, and indeed will have prevailed. So all the signs are out there. They want to go out saying we gave Ukraine everything, and it was not only the Ukrainians that couldn't get enough troops together, but it was the new administration that gave up and gave Russia favorable terms, and that's what's going to have to happen. Russia will have to have favorable terms, and what I mean by that is they have to have the terms that allow them not to feel threatened by missilery and other weaponry from Ukraine, as the U.S. felt threatened 61 years ago at this time when Russia put offensive strike missiles in Cuba. It's the same parallel, okay? When a nuclear-armed state threatens another nuclear arms strength, it comes to the pass where one has to challenge the other. We escaped nuclear destruction back in 1962. I hope we'll do that this time too, because Putin, whatever you can say about him, he's a very perspicacious, he's a very gradual, and he's a very, very careful person. I don't think he's going to rise to the bait by endangering what he's already achieved by widening the war, for example, into air bases in Romania or Poland.
Well, this is my theory, Ray, and please, correct me if I'm not anywhere near track here. Take a listen to what Trump has said repeatedly on the campaign trail, and then I want to make a point about this.
I would fix that within 24 hours. And if I win, before I get into the office, I will have that war settled. 100% sure.
As president-elect, if I win this election, the first thing I'm going to do is call up Zelensky and call up President Putin, and I'm going to say, you got to make a deal. This is crazy.
Okay, he wants to end the war in Ukraine on day one of his presidency. Perhaps the Democrats are going to make that more difficult for him. Perhaps that's what they're trying to do. Now, I'm just speculating here. I may be wrong. But keep in mind that Putin has said that long-range missile strikes into Russia is a red line he does not tolerate. That red line has been crossed. Now, perhaps they will make it more difficult for Putin and Trump to come to terms with an agreement or some sort of deal. What do you think?
I think that may be part of it, and that's very widely shared by commentators. But if you look at the realities here, what Putin is demanding in his June setting the terms of a settlement is a requirement that Ukraine abjure any intention of joining NATO, that Ukrainian forces leave the 4 provinces that Russia now claims as its own, and then there can be kind of a ceasefire and there can be negotiations. Now, will Trump agree to that? Well, I think there's leverage there. Russia does not want to take over all of Ukraine. It can easily go to the Dnieper River, which pretty much separates eastern from western Ukraine, but there are makings of a deal there. And Trump just has to realize that, well, what Trump could do is to say this: look, Obama himself, President Obama, 2015, said that the worst thing we can do in Ukraine is to give offensive weapons to them, because that would give them the idea that they could prevail over a much stronger Russia on its border. Obama, 2015. At the same time, there was a Deputy Secretary of State, David, who said, yes, I agree. Because if the Russians if we gave Ukraine offensive missiles, the Russians could match that, could double it, could triple it, could quadruple it. Now, do you know who that Deputy Secretary of State was? His name was Antony Blinken.
Interesting.
So he comes in with Biden, and Biden has these grandiose ideas about, well, you know, we are the exceptional country in the world. We're going to work our will in Ukraine, everywhere else, China, everywhere, West Asia. And Blinken plays to that, and so does Sullivan. Now they're in deep kimchi, I would say. And now they have to figure out who to blame. And it's the Ukrainians themselves for not having enough troops, right? That's been 2 days ago. And it will be Trump when he has to agree to terms that Putin will assist on. First and foremost, no NATO membership for Ukraine. Now, I just add one thing here. That has always been the requirement by Russia. And again, I make the analogy to the Cuban Missile Crisis. No offensive missiles in Cuba. Now, you don't have to take my word for it. We had a NATO Secretary General named Jens Stoltenberg, okay? And in a faux pas magnifique, he said before the EU Parliament a year ago, yes, Putin said, if you enlarge NATO to include Ukraine, we will have to invade Ukraine. So we said no. So he invaded Ukraine, and guess what? We enlarged NATO anyway. We got Sweden, we got Finland. Ha ha ha. God, how can he talk this way when the flower of Ukrainian youth has been decimated? When Russians and everybody else have suffered so much, when there was a deal made just 6 weeks after the war started, nixed by the UK and by the US. So now there you have he let the cat out of the bag. That was the demand. The US would not listen to it. And, we don't have to go back to promises that James Baker, the Secretary of State for George H.W. Bush, made to Gorbachev way back in 1970. You have to go back that far. No, after the Berlin Wall fell, 1990, okay? So you don't have to go back that far, but that was a promise, and that was violated. And
yes.
I think one more thing, David, that not many people know. When Putin announced before his four-star generals and admirals on the 21st of December 2021, that Ukraine was going to get offensive strike missiles of a hypersonic kind, which would put Moscow in risk of a 5-minute warning before it was obliterated. That was on the 21st of December. 6 days later, on the 30th of, whatever days later, on the 30th of December, Putin calls the White House. I need to talk to President Biden. Why do you need to do that? We have our negotiators are coming in, going to talk in Geneva in 12 days. Please let them talk. So Biden's alone. He's at home alone. It's Christmas. Okay. He's got no advisors with him. And he agrees, and it's in the readout. President of the United States said that the U.S. has no intention of putting offensive strike missiles in Ukraine. Now, there are some in Poland and some in Romania. This is what Putin said. Look, please give us this little undertaking. And apparently Biden said, well, that makes sense. And he agreed. They reneged on that. 3 weeks later, Lavrov, the foreign secretary, and Blinken says, well, forget about that. We're not going to talk. We're going to talk about that. We can maybe limit the number of offensive strike missiles in Ukraine, but we have the right to do that, and we will do it if the Ukrainians ask us. So this is a specific reneging that makes Putin very chary of any undertaking made by the United States, because it follows a whole bunch of them, starting back in 1990, as I said, when Baker promised not to expand NATO 1 inch to the east.
Your professional opinion as a former CIA officer, is there actually a tactical advantage given to Ukraine with the long-range missiles? Are they more at an advantage of winning the war if they have better offensive capabilities?
The answer is unequivocally no. And you don't have to take my word for it. The New York Times, the Washington Post, the Wall Street Journal, it's embedded in the middle of these articles says U.S. officials assure that this will make no real difference in the trajectory of the war. So why are they doing it? Well, my best guess, I'll let you know, is more PR or protecting one's derriere reasons. And the notion that Sullivan is blaming the Ukrainians for not having enough troops, after we goaded them on when a deal was reached back in March, April of 2022, that's really kind of, it makes me use words that I shouldn't use on a program like this. That's pretty despicable. He could have ended this thing early, and 500,000 Ukrainian soldiers would not be dead.
Russia has been testing tactical nuclear weapons for use in the battlefield. They haven't deployed them yet, but in the absolute worst case, should they use tactical nukes on Ukrainian soil, not on Western allies, not on France or anywhere in the West or in Europe, would the West have to respond, though?
Well, in real extremis, Putin might be tempted to do that. But that premise is really beyond the pale. He's not going to be tempted to do that because he will not be put in extremis by these longer range missile strikes. Now, there have been already 6 such missiles fired into Bryansk, which is right on the Ukrainian border in Kursk Oblast. Okay, what happened? The Russians shot down 5 of them, according to their own Ministry of Defense. The other one got through, but they claimed there was very little damage done. Why did Zelensky choose that kind of thing in a depot that was housing lots of old weaponry? Well, just to show that he could do it. Can he do anything more damaging? I doubt it. Either they'll be shot down or they will be such range that they do not reach real strategic targets in Russia. So again, Russia, in my view, and if Putin, being the person he is not going to be provoked into upping the ante here. The U.S. has already done that, at least Blinken and Sullivan have. And the last thing I'll mention here, which is very relevant, our defense minister, our defense secretary, Austin, is in touch with his counterpart in Moscow, Belousov, who's very, very close to Putin. What does that mean? That means that they are almost certainly back-channeling what's going on here. And with the Defense Department spokesperson not able to say that the Pentagon was even informed about this decision, well, you can be sure that that's consonant with whatever Austin is telling Belousov. That's another reason where I think we can relax a little bit. They are in touch. Blinken and Lavrov, no, they won't talk to each other. Biden and Putin, no. But there is this escape channel, this back channel between Austin and Belousov, and thank God for that.
Okay. Well, in our final segment, I'd like to just get your opinion on the state of U.S. security overall. Since 9/11, there have been several reforms to make intelligence gathering, more effective against counterterrorism. And of course, there's been the establishment of the U.S. Department of Homeland Security, amongst many other reforms. How would you evaluate the state of security today versus 20 years ago?
David, I hate to break the bad news to you, but these reforms were all politically inspired and worse than the things they were supposed to reform. The Department of Homeland Security and the position of Director of National Intelligence both are creatures of the 9/11 Commission. Now, why were they created by the 9/11 Commission? Because everyone had to cover up the knowledge that they had, the knowledge that was not acted upon. Not only the security services, but the Congress itself had deep knowledge about what was about to happen. It needed to be covered up. Now, I had a personal experience. When the 9/11 Commission report was issued, I had been asked by the BBC in London, to be in a green room there. And who comes in but Slade Gorton, former former senator from the state of Washington, who was on the 9/11 Commission. And I said to him, Senator Gorton, this business about the Director of Central Intelligence, George Tenet, not being in charge of the intelligence community, well, he was in charge. He just didn't act with his responsibility. And Gordon says, well, I know that. I said, well, why are you creating a new superstructure in the Department of Homeland Security? He says, Ray, for God's sake, we had to appear to be doing something, and that's what we chose. Okay, that's the way it works. So the Department of Homeland Security, well, look at what's happened. It used to be the FBI was responsible and could be held to account for what it did. So there's a dispersion of responsibility there. The Director of National Intelligence is a superstructure that has several thousand people, and its authority, Tulsi Gabbard, has been named to be the new Director of National Intelligence if she gets Senate confirmation. There is titular authority to bang some heads and get the community working as a cohesive whole, but these are like herding cats. Will she be able to do it? And will she be able to exercise her also authority to oversee and to comment on covert action proposals by the CIA? Well, that has never been effectively done. We'll have to see if she's up to that challenge too. But all I'm saying is there's a new level of bureaucracy here. There are several thousand people involved in it. It was not necessary if the former Director of Central Intelligence did his job, and that was George Tenet, and he and the Congress people that he told what was really going on, and the whole administration had to cover that up. And it's very clear that they decided to cover it up by saying, oh, we're going to improve, we're going to reforms that are politically based, very seldom work, especially with respect to the intelligence community, and I could speak to that for my 27 years there.
Well, okay, so who or what is America's biggest threat or threats today? If you were, let's say, preparing the president's security briefings again today, what would be page one of your report?
Well, I would cite what Mr. Putin said back in the first week of September 2013. Put yourself back then. There had been a sarin, a chemical attack outside Damascus, which John Kerry rushed up to say that Bashar al-Assad had done it. He had not done it. It was a false flag. Now, what did the president do? Well, he was buffeted by all his advisors. Now you have to send Tomahawk missiles into Syria. No longer this covert action stuff. We have to hit Syria full blast. He didn't want to do that. What did he do? He said, well, I'm going to consult Congress. Whoa, consult Congress, like the Constitution says? Yeah. And then he went by chance up to St. Petersburg and met with Putin. Now, there was an economic summit, but they met on the sides. And Putin said, look, Mr. Obama, I know that you don't want to do another war. So I got a solution for you. He said, what's that? Okay. Well, I've asked the Syrians, and they've agreed to destroy all their chemical weapons on a special ship outfitted for that under UN supervision. They're ready to announce that tomorrow. What do you think? Obama says, thank you, Jesus. Yeah, that's the solution. I don't have to start another war. He said, agreed. Did Kerry know about that? No. Obama comes back and he says, look, Kerry, you make this deal, you sign it, we're out of the war, we don't have to start a war. All his advisors were against that. Now, what's my point? My point is that at that same time, the 12th of September, 2013, there was an op-ed in the New York Times written by a fellow named Vladimir Vladimirovich Putin, president of Russia. And what did he say? Last paragraph, which I'm reliably informed, and there is confirmation of this, that he penned himself. What did he say? I am encouraged by the increasing trust between not only the United States and Russia, but between President Obama and me personally. We solved no war in Syria. We can do even more. The only thing I object to, says Putin in this last paragraph, is the notion that there are exceptional countries. President Obama made that point in a big speech just last week, says Putin. I don't think there are exceptional countries. I think there are big countries, small countries, countries that are closer to democracy, and some countries farther away from it. But when God looks down at all the countries in the world, he looks at them as all being equal, period, end quote. Okay. Now, what happened? There was increasing trust. It looked good. And the neocons, in the person of Victoria Nuland and the likes of Blinken and the rest of them, decided, well, there can't be increasing trust. We're going to do a coup now in Kiev. And they did so 6 months later, the 14th of February, 2014. And that's when, from the ATACMS, okay, down to the NATO, U.S.-Russian relations fell. And that's where we are now. The prospect of a new administration does give a prospect of a new approach. But as long as Trump or anybody else thinks that the U.S. is exceptional or indispensable, as Madeleine Albright used to say, well, that ain't the case anymore. And reality sets in when you see most of the world under the BRICS structure there. Most of the people of color, which is not incidental here, have as much GDP and other things as the lily white West. And I hope that Trump is able to come to terms with it. World War II, yeah, we were the exception. We were the indispensable. After the Russians fell apart in 1991, yeah, again, we had, but no more. And that's what I would tell a new president. Look, sorry to tell you this, but don't pretend. Don't even think you're exceptional. You got to play ball with the rest of the countries and with Russia in particular, because now you're really behind the 8 ball, because Russia and China are joined at the hip. It's 2 against 1 now, Mr. President. The old triangular relationship that Nixon was able to exploit, right? Russia, China, the long ends, and then the U.S., well, now it's an isosceles triangle with the U.S. right in the middle there, the short end of the stick. If the new president recognizes that and decides to get along with other countries on a mutual respect basis, there's great hope that we could live with the rest of the world. Otherwise, it's going to be more war.
Last question, and I'll let you go. Thank you very much, Ray. In your opinion, do you think that the U.S. is equipped today to fight a near-peer competitor on the likes of Russia or China in the open battlefield versus its capabilities back in the Reagan days?
The answer is no. Unequivocally no. Why? When we spend several times as much money as Russia or China on our defense expenditures, well, we make the really sensitive all bells and whistles, things like the F-35 fighters, which cost several $100 million a piece, okay? And we don't make the kind of shells, the 155 millimeter shells that I trained on back in the early 60s, okay, that are necessary to fight a land war again in Ukraine, okay? So that's one thing. The defense people have been making hand over fist a lot of money, okay, but they haven't been creating the kind of weaponry that we would need in a contest with Russia. Why? Well, the bottom line is, as George W. Bush said during his administration, the first administration, look, we welcome Russia's and China's advance toward a more democratic and a more economically stable, and we have nothing to fear from them. Now, we didn't then, and we don't now, because it's a canard. It's a canard to say that the Russians want to take over all of Ukraine, much less Poland, Latvia, Estonia, Lithuania. I mean, I don't tell Biden that sort of thing, but the Russians have no, I've been there, I've seen done that. I don't know why they want to do this, okay? And they don't want to do it. That's why, and NATO realizes that, for God's sake. That's why they have no 155 millimeter shell. Now, you have people in NATO, like the defense minister in Berlin, who says, oh, yeah, 2029, that's when we have to be ready for the Russian invasion. What does that mean? That means that the military-industrial complex is going to have a gravy time between now, a halcyon day between now and 2009. That's what directs all this stuff. We ought to face up to that.
What would the next great war look like? If we were to speculate, would it be conventional? You talked about, the lack of prioritization of producing ammunition, but would we need that to the same extent as the Cold War did?
Oh my God, David, I just would say we have one war now in Ukraine. What's happening is that the Russians are winning, despite the fact that the president himself said in July of last year that Putin has already lost, right? So that's one war going on now. Now, the strategic equation is really very tentative. We are enhancing the ability of our strategic weaponry, our missiles, the missiles from our ICBMs, the missiles from our submarines, even the missiles on our bombers. We are enhancing them so that they have an accuracy that you wouldn't believe, okay? Why are they doing that? Well, the Russians are watching all this. I mean, they have very good intelligence, and they're asking the same question. Why are they doing? Do they really want to have a first strike capability? We have no ABM protection because we abjured that. We said, this is crazy. It's never going to work. And indeed, we were right. And we have a retaliatory setup here where we can inflict we can obliterate the United States, but why would they want to be doing this? So these are questions that you and I can discuss dispassionately when Putin has to look over his shoulder to his generals and his admirals and say, why are they doing this, Mr. Putin? Well, the answer is they're trying to make them even more accurate for the chance that they want to make a preemptive strike, and thinking that their feckless ABM systems, so we don't really have any, would protect them from a counterstrike. So that gets us back to before the Cuban Missile Crisis, for God's sake. And, it's really, for me, I've been around a while, as you could tell, David. For me to see this happen, it's really quite extraordinary. I'm hoping that with the new administration, there will be a little more sense injected into the equation, and that people will start talking. For God's sake, if you don't even talk to the Russians, how are you going to figure out how to solve these major problems?
It's been a great privilege and opportunity to speak with you, Ray. Before we go, what is your favorite spy movie, the most accurate one, or your favorite one in your personal collection that you've watched?
Well, I don't watch very many movies. I go back to the Red October for the year. Yeah. But I don't take a lot of time out for that because I have other domestic duties here as well as watching what's going on in the world.
All right. So James Bond isn't accurate. The spies don't drive around in Aston Martins. And
that was a good one.
Thank you very much. Where can we learn more from you, Ray?
I have a website, raymcgovern.com. My son runs it, and I'm glad you asked because he really reams me out if I forget to mention it on a program such as this. RayMcGovern.com. I'm also on Twitter at Ray McGovern. So, yeah, I welcome people clicking in, so to speak.
All right, we'll put the links down below, so make sure to follow Ray there. Thank you very much, Ray. We'll speak again soon, I hope, and thank you for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe.